Welcome to RELOGIA, where all disciplines connect via art, sci, tech, trialogues. The passion to evolve. The more you know, the more you need to know. Knowledge is a perpetual process with many layers to organize, to learn, to communicate, to educate. Knowledge gives you the power of time, the power to create, to rearrange your universe. Team 3, STEAM Education, Art Sci Tech, Trialogue 5. On the art chair, Professor Dr. Gilles Scott, Professor Emerita for Art and Science Research, Institute for Cultural Studies, Zürich University of the Arts, Switzerland.
Hello everybody, and I'm very, very glad to be here. I think this is the start of something very, very industrious and very interesting. I'm going to talk about creative incubators for a common culture. I'm the founder of a program called the Swiss Artist in Labs program, where we have placed over 40 artists into Swiss science labs to have experiences, hands-on experiences of learning about science. Artists from all disciplines, sound to dance to everything. I'm also running a thing called Laser Zurich, which is a program for us to create a community around this discourse of art and science and technology. And so I see myself as a theorist, a context provider, and an artist. Oops. So what I want to talk about, yeah. I know the receiver's over there somewhere, is this incredible beginning of our problem, which is this two culture theories by C.P. Snow, outlined in 1959. This is the standard line analogy between the arts and the sciences. So we have ambiguous, visceral, poetic, metaphorical, intervening potentials on the other side, and one on the other side we have deductive, didactic, factual, analogous kinds of postulative research. So these older educational divisions, with this communication and social science in the middle, bring up questions like this. Is it art or science? Who determines the criticism of aesthetic values here? Should art illustrate or represent science? Which becomes a big problem of art in the service of science. And what do social sciences get out of art and design? So these are some of the early questions we were asking in this field of art and science. But I prefer this construction. This is in fact a more interesting educational concept, and I think it's something we have to think about. The creation of interspatial zones between these disciplines that are about artists, social scientists, and designers, the overlaps between these disciplines. And I'm going to focus on that in my talk. So interspatial zones include where themes emerge that are based on understanding life. They're places where problems can be discussed, problems that need critical and lateral transdisciplinary approaches. So let's take a closer look at these interspatial zones. Where would you place yourself within these interspatial zones? I would place myself as a black dot in the middle, because I feel like I'm constantly in this area, which is a sort of a interesting zone between all disciplines. And I believe that this is where art and science education degrees, from right down into the levels of undergraduate, all the way up through master's and PhD programs, in this zone is where those should be. So for me, it's a chance this chance to share knowledge here, to understand different systematic methods, and to think about critical analysis and different discourses. These are the interspatial zones that we should be focusing on, in my opinion. This is where the value of lateral thinking can be seen most proficient and can become most proficient. Now, Edouard de Bono suggested that lateral thinking is the solving of problems in an indirect and creative approach, using reasoning that's not immediately obvious and involves ideas that may not be obtainable by using only traditional step-by-step logic. And Lynn Margulis says that science is an international activity, but one always has to think sideways. And I think that she was married to Carl Sagan, who was a physicist. She already had transdisciplinary influences in her life. And she's a great discoverer of evolutionary biology, of the theory of endosymbiosis. She always said she spent most of her time not in the genetics lab. She spent most of her time in evolutionary biology, wandering around in other labs in the Berkeley campus. I think it's very important to think about ways in which we can provide interspatial zones and that initiatives from the educational perspectives. So this is an example that we started the Artist in Labs. We had to invent new methodologies. We had to think about selections of juries that involved scientists as well as artists on the panels. We had to think about expert and non-expert interaction, what that meant, the communication of that. And we had to think about access to new methodologies and materials, even wet materials, like in the biological lab. And I think these lateral thinking experience has inspired critical analysis. It's inspired new ways of know-how transfer, and it's inspired new communication potentials. So I'm going to talk about particular examples now that artists have developed works from knowing scientists or have absolutely collaborated with scientists and appropriated their ideas from scientific discovery. And I'm going to do 4 examples, and the examples are from the growth of life and the study of behavior, matter and energy, evolution and ecology, and group incubators to promote communities. So let's start with the biological lab. I mean, it is an incubator in itself. They're in fact incubators for creative practice. But for artists, they free artists from ideas that are hoaxes or misleading information. They help us clarify by learning definitions and discourses. They challenge us to rethink tools and materials or calibrate them to suit other disciplines. And they demonstrate the importance of teamwork. Art and science really, really works with teams. Teams are essential for the innovation and for the potentials of science. And how these themes should be rotated so that the successful growth of ideas and projects can be nurtured. So this is a project of mine, actually. I'm going to also talk about my own work. This is a project that came from an artist in residence in a neural science lab on neural development, looking at how the neural tube develops and the somatic cortex, particularly where we have representational maps that understand our touch, our relation to texture, shape, stretch, size, translation, and correlation. So in this project, I have a dancer who mimics or basically interprets the problems that you have in vitro when you are, or the problems that you have in vivo in the womb if you have certain kinds of interferences in the environment. I'm just going to show that if I can. Hopefully it works. Oops. Play the movie, hopefully. No. This is the problem with I had the other before. Okay, so basically I'll describe it to you. It's a project where you can put your hand inside a neural tube and cause different kinds of growth patterns to be misdirected or directed into the right direction. You can also interact with this touch screen, which is based on an open book method of dissection, and you can drop ethanol into the in vivo environment, and when you do, you get all kinds of problems that occur, which is related to alcohol-fetal syndrome and the problems of mothers when they drink too much alcohol. So it's a very interesting project that you put the viewer in the role of actually destroying the embryo. Okay, so there are many examples for incubators based on these themes and hormones and bodily awareness, and understanding disability and sensory stimulus for society and the mind. And here these incubators, of course, include all kinds of issues. With the lab itself, there can be actual labs, portable labs, biomimicry inspiration from the labs, and labs in the public space. So these kinds of growth and metaphors for growth and behavior create a kind of lateral thinking. They're an important base for lateral thinking. And many of these bio-art and bio-projects that are based on behaviors investigate biomimic analogies between animal and human subjects, and they explore the fields of ability and disability or impairment. And that's been one of the things I'm very interested in relation to my 16 years of experience in neuroscience. Now let's move on to the next example. This is between matter and energy. Here, artist Roman Keller collaborated with 2 other scientists to go in the physics archives and look at the potentials of steam power from 1939. There were a lot of experiments around steam power in that time. Together with the scientists, they built a rocket that uses steam power that flew 2 kilometers. And actually, that's almost enough to get it through the top of the atmosphere. So what they've proved out of this art and science collaboration is that the viable rocket fuel of steam power was actually abandoned far too soon. This is another project also working with real-time neophilometer to measure the smallest, most dangerous pollution particle for human health, PM2.5. The collaborators are meteorologists. So what she's done is taken their material, their actual measurement devices, and worked with them to produce a project whereby the traffic on the street changes the visual and audio appearances and sounds and visuals of a waterfall. So the waterfall, in fact, is affected by the real-time pollution on the street. This is a public artwork that brings a lot of attention to the issues around pollution. She's an ex-PhD student of mine. So this matter and energy, there's many, many works and many, many interests in this area based on themes of building experiments collaboratively, sonifying and visualizing data, and the invisible, and exploring effects of particle acceleration. And the artists who go into physics are always interested in the fact that behaviors arise from situated interaction in physics. And the research is not about knowing, it's about believing in the value of error. And that's like really important part. We were just talking about that before with some people in the audience. And it's very, very important that we understand that failure is also part of innovation and learning, and certainly part of these interspatial zones. So now we're going to give some examples of environmental science and media art. This is one of mine again. I had collaborators in neuroscience, Stefan Neuhaus, and in marine biology, Chris Robinson. As you can see from this diagram, the relationship between the camera-based eye, the evolution of the camera-based eye, can be traced from jellyfish through to squid, through to us. This camera-based eye evolution has very similar photoreceptors, and this project is about that. But it's housed in the barrier reef. So what you can do is you can choose to warm the water, and when you warm the water, you get more jellyfish and you get more problems. So the audience has control over the environment to change the environment. So you have an augmented reality project that people can learn about ways of seeing, and also about the environmental problems of acidity in the barrier reef. So there are many examples of creative incubators based on themes of evolution, symbiotic behavior, animal welfare, and in the field of wetlands in the Antarctic, we've had projects in the Arctic with field researchers who are sonifying that data from seals and their loss of habitat, and particularly their loss of their krill, the main food they supply. So we've had a lot of, I can give you thousands of examples of artists who are working in science now and making very, very interesting communication potentials for the public. Despite, however, our very recent appearance on this planet, humanity combines arrogance with an increasing material demands, even if we become more numerous. Our toughness is a delusion. Have we the intelligence and discipline to guard against our tendency to grow without limit? This kind of ideology and this kind of questions that around this big question really has caused a rise in group incubators that respond to some of these problems, and perceiving our environments as natural, social, and of course political. And in that discussion, these 2 points are brought up many, many times. In ethics, these questioned by Sandra Harding, the social scientist, whose knowledge is being produced and for which people's benefits, and who's going to bear the costs and monitor which research is more important than other research. And then this awareness of what I've learned from molecular biology. This is a very important thing to consider when we consider group incubators. We're not just single individuals walking the planet. We're walking ecosystems made of microbes. Microbes are in the soil, in the water, in our bodies. Microbes as bacteria, fungi, and viruses are part of our skin microflora, covering both the inside and the outer surface of the body. And they have symbiotic relationship with the interface between our body and the environment, which is our skin. So I'm going to show you now a couple of these ideas of group incubators and what's happening at the moment in relation of artists and scientists collaborating. This is an PhD student of mine. He knows Tiselli, and he worked with an agroecologist, Angelica Hilbeck, to create a media art platform for farmers. So this is an app. The community can use the app to record and interact and learn how to write their own platform. Now this has moved from 20 in the last 6 years to 6,000 users. So basically it's a very interesting initiative and an innovative one that helps farmers compare what's happening in on their farms in relation to climate change. I also work in community work, and this is a project that I completed last year and also this year in Basel. And it's about giving a platform for visually impaired learners to comment on the local effects of environment, on the environment, of climate change, and also of the anthropogenic effects we're having on our local environment. And in it, I work with different choreographers and different sets of visually impaired people, and together we make a comment on the local situation for a local audience, particularly based on the problems of the environment around them. And how we do that is we use interviews with them. We talk about what sounds they remember, what textures they remember, and how, in fact, then we incorporate, and how they feel about their environment, and then we incorporate that into a dance and performance project by letting them work with wearable technologies. This is another project from friends of ours who are working with women and empowering equality by giving them some kind of equality by being tech savvy. This is a DIY hacking incubator in Vienna, and it's important to see that people now in society, citizens, are taking on their own role for educational initiatives like this and trying to help each other to develop good software and this software is coming from a very potential good community. It's important to raise awareness. This raises awareness, of course, about the ethical differences and the problems we have right now by offering a service. Now, you probably know, I mean, there's, but if you look at what's going on on technology at the moment, there's thousands of different fab labs, hacking groups. These are all outside the institutions and need some recognition for their interspatial zone activities. This is another project we are doing. It's called Trying to Raise Community Awareness by opening up themes, thematic discourses between artists and scientists and the general public straight off the street into a cafe. So it's a science cafe. And what we're trying to do there is look at some of these issues, times of waste, complexity, biohacking or eco-hacking, and using this format or this platform for people to speak out and also for people to learn who wouldn't normally have that access. So what I'm saying is that sharing themes commonizes a culture and it creates an interspatial zone of lateral and critical thinking. And the creative incubator is a space of mutual understanding for discussion of practice and not just for new inventions and discourses and discoveries, but those matters which are uninformed and in process, difficult to describe even in the language of one's own discipline. So creative incubators for a common culture could continue to create a system with its own logic and a way forward, more social integration for the problems we're trying to deal with, a series of energetic subsystems that can remove boundaries between culture and social systems, actions that are not based on self-interest with mass media motivations. That's kind of an important issue, I think. A place where experts meet with non-experts to share ideas about impacts for the common good. And a code of practice and ethics for future generations. I think that's all I've got to say. Oops. This is not actually functioning so well. The battery might be flat, actually, between here and there. But there's more information on all of these websites about these projects. And I would say that for me, it's important to realize that there's a lot of individuals having initiatives that have to be credited with those initiatives. And they're not necessarily in institutions. They might also be outside institutions. And these incubators, these interspatial incubators, where lateral thinking is really important to consider, might be something you want to join. Okay, thank you.
On the science chair, Dr. Vladimir Garkov, DG, Director General for Education and Culture, European Commission, Brussels, Belgium.
All right, thank you. Thank you for this fantastic event, world class, I would say. I'll try to be brief. As you can see, my goal would be to tell you a little bit of what we do at the European Commission in the field of education in terms of holistic education. And what I'm going to start with is the place we are at, which is... извинявайте. Actually, I have a normal microphone here. We are in the center of the Balkans, and it's I would say, the heart of the Western civilization as we know it. And what distinguishes this civilization of the rest of the world is the agora, the marketplace. And what I wanted to say here is something that maybe will contradict some of the earlier speakers. There is nothing 21st century about the skills we talk about. They've been around for millennia. And they were discovered and developed where in this area of the world, the Agora, and you know that Philippopolis, do you know where Philippopolis is? What is the name of Philippopolis today? Plovdiv, exactly. And who was Philip? Whose name Philippopolis is named after? Who is Philip II? He's the father of who? Of Alexander the Great, exactly. So what I'm talking about is, 2,500 years ago. So the idea of the holistic education is not new. It's been around. And now it used to be called, now we call it key competencies-based education. And in order to make this link to the past is this framework, updated by the European Commission just last year, the Key Competences Framework, which includes everything we talk about here. We're talking about creative art, we're talking about cultural understanding, languages, and of course, the most basic, the most important, science, math, and literacy. The idea of those key competencies is they include 3 components. First and foremost, knowledge, then skills, and attitudes. The key word that I would like to point out here is all, which means that we are not talking about competence that is supposed to be for professional development. No, this is competence about for every single citizen that walks this land of the ancient Greeks. Another thing I just wanted to emphasize, let me go back here, if I could. You might notice that STEM, from an educational perspective, is a different concept from digital competence. This is science and math. Now, professionally speaking, of course, STEM professionals include also the IT professionals. But when we educate our children, we start with maths and science, and this is what we talk about here. I'm not going to be referring to to making those digital natives, as we call them, into more digital. So there are 2 different competencies, that is the point. Why are we concerned about this at the European Commission level? Look at the data in PISA. Does this look nice? Yes or no? No, of course not. Our immediate competitors, and we are talking about 15-year-olds across the world, our immediate competitors in East Asia and the United States are ahead of us. Look at this data. Let me just explain. 66% said yes to the question posed to them, not to the statement that science and technology make our lives healthier, easier, and more comfortable. 5 years later, it was in, hold on, what is the year? Okay. Less, okay. 5 years earlier, it was 78%. Now it is less. 2005 versus 2010. And we are in the process of making another Eurobarometer that will check that. And I'm not going to go over all the questions that were asked during this Eurobarometer because they're very embarrassing. You will see that nearly half of the Europeans think that maybe we should look, that science is just too powerful and scientists are dangerous and this type of thing. But so we have a problem, huge problem at the European level. Unlike the Chinese or the Americans, we do not trust science. I'm not saying you and I, we are talking about the average European. Not only that, but we also do not, our students, 15-year-olds, are not good in science. This is the latest PISA, and the new one is coming in about a couple of weeks. 1/5 of our students across the board, across the EU are functionally illiterate. In some countries like Bulgaria, it's up to 40%. The interesting thing is that gender, of course, doesn't play a role. We've known this for many years now. But according to the same benchmark of less than 15% of our 15-year-olds should score level 2 on PISA and above. And we are not there yet. But interestingly, it's boys who are the problem, not girls. There, well, the difference is negligible, but you all have to take into account the fact that the number of boys, the percentage of boys who leave school early is larger everywhere, except for Bulgaria, where girls live more. But I'm going to show you also some interesting data here. The expectations of science career by gender, and you can see there's no difference. All the claims that girls supposedly, they're just so fragile, we have to help them. No, they're doing pretty well. They are interested in doing science, and facts show that. The only difference is they are interested in the more complex type of science. Because IT, first of all, is not science to begin with, but in general, the biological sciences are much more, with a much larger number of factors, are much more complex, and this is where girls go. Well, boys prefer to work with machines, girls prefer to work with people, which is far more difficult. And we have to give them credit for that. Thank God they want to do that. Another interesting data from Eurostat, one positive thing we can say about Bulgaria is that this Bulgaria, as well as most of the East European countries, actually are pretty much employing about half of the high-tech jobs in Bulgaria, 44% to be exact, is taken by women. This is not the case in Western Europe. That's why West Europeans always talk about, we have to help our women. No, here, this is not the case. And the explanation, of course, from Financial Times is that it's related to our the gender equality, the gender equality which existed during socialism. And so if gender is not an issue, what is the issue then? Socioeconomics. And again, Bulgaria tops all European countries in terms of the difference between the top and the bottom. So here we have the largest gap between high-performing students and low-performing students. So we have challenges. But at the European level, we are looking at trying to help member states through advice, through sharing of good practices. We do not have specific directives. We can only support the efforts of the member states. So we have instruments, and I'm just listing a couple of here, that you might want to consult if you're interested. I'm not going to read off the slide because this is always say to my students, never do that. Another issue is, hold on. Sorry, these were the main challenges. I made a mistake. This is the main challenges is the idea about as I said, problem with scientific attitudes towards science, general public achievement levels, and also we have a problem with the STEM teachers. But these are our instruments at European level, and some examples of actions. We already talked about STEAM, and this is, I just wanted to clarify. STEAM is an approach to improve the teaching of the STEM subjects, the way we have traditionally understood it. There is also another way. We can also increase the interest in the arts, which is in huge decline because of obvious reasons, using STEM, using technology, using science relevance to everyday life, and to infuse enthusiasm in our students towards the arts. I'm not going to talk about STEM Coalition, which was already one of the examples you heard of. The partnerships also between schools and the community and between industry. So this is a good kind of a summary slide where we expect close integration between these 5 components of our society in order to help with tackling the main challenges. And again, I repeat, the main challenges are the average citizen does not trust science and scientists. The average student is not very good, exactly as you saw, 1/5 across the EU. And we have also problems with the STEM teachers across the EU again. So let's say STEM ambassadors going to the schools, or maybe alternative pathways to teachers going from industry to schools. So there are a variety of ways in which the European Commission is trying to recommend to our member states so that they could address those challenges. Now, and we know also about the so-called innovative, in quotation marks, pedagogies, inquiry-based learning, and ICT. Now, so I have a question for you. Can you please read it? And those who say it is true, raise your hands, please. Okay, do I assume that the others are no? Okay, well, let me repeat the question. So, browsing the internet for schoolwork at school, and this is important, not at home, at school, will lead to higher level of reading literacy. And I saw quite a few people thinking this is the case. What is the evidence? The opposite. The next question. Oh, sorry. I just wanted to clarify. Another study that we did at European Commission, the Joint Research Center in Sevilla. I'm not saying that ICT is not good. ICT is wonderful, but not for the majority of students, unless it is tailored to their specific needs. And I would like to emphasize this particular point here. Used in a pedagogically meaningful way. Not just for the sake of using ICT. How many of you agree with this statement? How many of you think it is, let's say, false? Okay, it seems like the majority. What do you think the evidence is? Do you see a single country where it actually helps? I don't. And again, the evidence from PISA shows that the teacher-directed instruction is associated with student science achievement. Am I telling you that inquiry-based science teaching is wrong? No. All I'm saying is, unless you do it in a pedagogically meaningful way, because inquiry-based science teaching requires a lot of effort on part of the teacher and the student, because the student takes responsibility of his or her own learning process. And this is effort. And most students across the nation, across the OECD are not really, they prefer to be told. But active participation requires a lot of effort, and we need to push that. We need, in other words, my conclusion is we need more work. We need to emphasize that it is the way to go, but in order to motivate our, because motivation actually increases, we use this method, then we need to be more, how could I say, to approach it in a more intelligent way. Okay, so, and to go back to this holistic approach to education, which includes the key competences in their entirety, not just math science, but as during this wonderfully organized conference, it became clear that we have to include all disciplines. We have to use the help of all disciplines to create the holistic education, to create a whole person who could understand the world from different perspectives. And just one little thing I wanted just to, in brackets, to say, people use the word creativity a lot. And I think we have to be clear. In science, you cannot be creative unless you have knowledge. That is the reason why we talk about key competencies-based education. Maybe, yes, maybe you can draw something, and children are inclined to draw any kind of pictures, and we are so proud of them. My 2-year-old, look what she did, and they put it on on each other work desks. The idea here is to also emphasize something that a lot of previous speakers said. Non-cognitive basic skills. And we are in the process, I'm personally involved in that. Next week, we will validate the more detailed recommendation on part of the European Commission on what it means to achieve personal, social, and learning to learn. Because without that, none of the above could occur. And here is the evidence. Again, from PISA, you know, this idea of what students understand and how they view their own knowledge and, I would say, epistemological understanding of building their own learning is of crucial importance. Across all countries tested in PISA, this is associated with much better performance. So, as I said, I repeat again, it is the personal, social, together with the, the basic skills of maths and science and literacy, that we need to emphasize. And all the speakers before me emphasized exactly the same point. And my final thought is related to something which is on the political agenda of the European Commission big time these days. And we would like to pursue more solidly something which is not new. There was a UN decade on education for sustainable development. However, I think we need an EU-wide coordination, because this is all we do. So that's it. I'll be happy to answer any questions, but probably later. Thank you.
On the tech chair, Beatrice Boots, Director of PTvT, Dutch National STEAM Platform, the Netherlands.
Who do I have to? Can you put up my presentation, please? Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Beatrice Boots. I'm the director of the Dutch STEM platform. And thank you, Vladimir, for this introduction, because now you've all seen that the Netherlands is not doing really well with STEM. And that's also the reason why this STEM platform was set up. And I'm going to tell you in the next 10-15 minutes a little bit more about it and about our approach, also a little bit about our results. And hopefully you can learn from it and take it back home to your own country. So the Dutch National STEM Platform has a long tradition. I even found newspapers from 1902 saying that we had a shortage of engineers and STEM people. So it's not something which is new. And we are glad that also in the EU there's now a lot of attention for it, but it's actually already a very long, it already goes back very long. And but I'll take you back to the year of 2000, where in Europe was an important meeting in Lisbon. We all know the Lisbon goals, and there was a strategy in Lisbon agreed upon with all the European countries saying we should have more STEM people in Europe because we want to compete with Asia and with the United States, and they have a lot of people in R&D, and those people are usually STEM people, and if we want to compete with them in the future, we need more STEM people. And also in the Netherlands, we looked at the numbers, and I saw them back again in Vladimir's numbers, because the numbers go very slow. This is really a long-term approach. And in Holland, everybody was almost doing better. We're always in the lowest 3 countries or something, especially at that time. So we had Dutch 3 ministries, and they said, well, now we really have to do something. We're also going to invest in this. And the Ministry of Economic Affairs, Social Affairs, and also Education said we are going to make a coordinated STEM strategy, which was called the Delta Plan. In Holland, if we have a big problem, we make a Delta Plan. You might know we have a big problem with water. We have the Delta works, so if we have a big problem in Holland, we make a Delta Plan. So for STEM, we also had a Delta Plan. You can see the Lisbon goals were in 2000, and by the time we had this plan was 2004. So we were not really quick with it, but at least we had one. And in between, we also had a program called JetNet. That's a program by companies. I will come back to that later. That was started in 2002. What I mean with this is that if companies really want to do something, they can be a lot quicker than the government. Well, this STEM platform evolved during the years. So the first period from 2004 until 2010, we had this Delta Plan, but also a lot of money. After that, we had the so-called top sector approach. We said we have a few top sectors in the Netherlands. They are very reliable. They rely on enough STEM people in the Netherlands. It's sectors like the water sector, the chemical sector, energy sector, also the more creative sector. And since 2013, we have the so-called Technology Pact. And the Technology Pact is, again, it evolved from all the earlier approaches. And what we did there is it was more public-private finance. It was, of course, in a period where we had an economic bad situation, so we wanted more private investments. And also what we did is get our regions more involved in the issue of the mismatch of people coming out of our educational system and the people that are needed in our labor market. And to give you an idea, we now have set a goal in the Netherlands that 40% of the people graduating in vocational education and higher education, so 40% of those should have a STEM degree. And when we were in 2000, this was only 15%. So 15 out of 100 people had a STEM degree at that time. We are now slowly going up. I'll show you some numbers shortly. But then you get a bit of an idea that if you want to be an innovative country where you export a lot, we have big companies like Shell, Philips, ASML that makes all the ship machines that are used again by companies that make your telephone. If that is the kind of country you want to be, but only 15% of your population chooses STEM, then you will have a problem in the future. And most recently, 2019, our Dutch National STEM Platform was had a fusion together with the private organizations of the technical companies. So now also our national STEM platform is funded privately. And I think if I look at the other European STEM platforms, that is something which you don't see a lot yet, but I do think it's the future. So our STEM platform was needed because we had so many scattered projects and we didn't know anymore who was doing what, whether it did have quality or not. And so said, well, the STEM platform should not only try to get people active in the year 2000, but also try to have a coordination role. And within that coordination role, we try to have a chain approach, as we call it. We say we have to start young with people at primary education, then we have to continue to secondary education, and also vocational education, and then further higher education, whether it's the applied universities or whether it's the research universities. In the whole chain of education, of a student going through all the education sectors, we should do something to interest people for STEM, because we saw at each next level, in each next sector, people would drop out. And the most dropouts were in the secondary education area. And also within the regions, in the Netherlands, it's not everywhere the same, but in the Netherlands, in the regions, there is no role for the government to work together with education and companies. They only are about roads and the woods and water situation. But we also said they should also be more involved, because in the end, the regions rely on whether companies want to settle in their region, and they also look at whether you have the good trained population there. Other things we did is maintaining the networks and try to upscale things that are working at a higher level and in a higher speed. And also to create continuity. What we see is things change very slow, especially our education system, but also our government themselves. As I told you, it took them 4 years to make a plan. Well, implementing a plan is a lot more difficult and takes a lot more time than just writing down a plan and say, hey, this is the plan, and now I have a vision and I have a mission, and then it really gets started. So I think in the Netherlands, we have too less time and too less focus on implementing the goals we are setting ourselves. And that's also why the STEM platform, as you could see, we started in 2004. We said it was a temporary platform, but it's almost 2020 and we're still there. That's because before you get results, and you change people's habits and interests and approaches, it takes a long time. So get things sustainable is very important here. Well, of course, something else we do is get all the knowledge together and divide it again to people who are interested in also picking up on this strategy and activities. So we do things better, we do things faster, we do it based on research. There is a lot of research, but again, this is very scattered. Most schools or institutions don't have the time to all look at that. And we as a national organization can do that and can also provide it to everybody and also collect international research and information. This is some about results. Maybe it's quite a large screen, so I think you can see it a bit. As I told you, in the 2000, it's of course a longer thing. We were under 20%. This is higher education. And now we are reaching very, very slowly to the 40%. And our main focus in Lisbon was more STEM people in higher education. That's why we also focus on secondary education. That's where you see that we are getting better numbers. In vocational education, there was no focus on it in the Netherlands, and it has been very, very recently, and we're also starting to invest in it now that the economic situation is a little bit better. But the thing is, we still have to get that started, so before we see numbers, it will take some time. As I told you, the times to go through that is taking quite some time. Well, what is the qualitative impact of the achievement? We see that public-private partnerships are becoming the new normal, as we call it. In primary and secondary education, the program is called JetNet, and now because of the merger with the private sector, we call it JetNet and TechNet. So these are companies who already started in 2002 to show children what can you do with STEM. because the children in schools have a very narrow view of what you can do with STEM. It's about sums, it's about well, very boring things. They have no idea how they can, what kind of jobs there are. So we asked companies, show these children in school what kind of jobs can they do with it. And also, if I look at the pictograms of Vladimir, when you gave us the examples of the key competences, the STEM pictogram was again very boring. It was the plus, it was the minus. It didn't have a person in it. Well, STEM is all about people and persons, and it's about our future, and and it's going to create our future. So maybe you can pass through to the EU that also the STEM pictogram should have a person in it. I think that would help our children to see that STEM is also something with people, because that's the idea that they had. And that's why we made the JetNet, the school company partnership in secondary education, to give a better view of what they can do in STEM companies. And also in the government themselves, we need more and more STEM people. So also non-government organizations are involved. Also Greenpeace needs a lot of people, needs engineers, for instance, or ICT people. So it's not only about the big STEM companies, it's also in the SMEs and in the government, in non-government, it's everywhere. Something I would like to say something about is some new things we started, like the hybrid teacher, as we call it, in the Netherlands. And I know in many European countries, we find it difficult to get people enthusiastic to becoming a teacher, whether it's a STEM teacher, which it's also language teachers. And we face that problem in the Netherlands as well. We tried a lot, but I think also young people nowadays, they're not going to work for the government or for a big company for the rest of their lives. They do this, then they do this for a time, and then they'll maybe be a sort of entrepreneur for some time. And also wanting to be a teacher, I think a lot of people are interested. We actually researched it, and 40% of the Dutch population, it was a very big research, said we are interested in teaching, but not always, not the rest of our lives, but maybe at some point for a few years, or maybe part-time, combining it with another job or with our own company. So what we are trying now is to train people who already have a degree, but are now thinking of teaching, to give them a short, because they already have a lot of experience, to give them a short program to become a teacher. And of course, you can't be a teacher overnight, also not with 3 months of training, but to get them started, to get them already maybe as guest lecturers in education. And you have a lot of challenges because the payments are different, sometimes the pensions are different, the cultures between outside schools and within schools are different. So there are things to overcome. But we think in the Netherlands it's the future, and already big labor organizations say that in vocational education, all teachers should be hybrid teachers in the future. Well, I don't know if we get that far. Maybe we have a small key group of teachers who have the overview of all the teachers, but I think the hybrid teachers, at least in the Netherlands, will be something which will be the new normal in the future. STEM in non-technical sectors. Well, if we look at today like arts, and I think in the European STEM or STEAM platform, should the A be involved? Well, our STEM people in the Netherlands say STEM in itself is so creative. It's about designing. Engineering is about making new things. So the A for us is already in there. So that's why we still call it STEM. But of course, a lot of people who do not choose STEM, but are in one of the other alpha or gamma sectors, as we call them, will increasingly get to know more, to do more with STEM and have to be more active in it, should have more knowledge about it. So what we are also doing is not only get 40% out of our education system with a STEM degree, but also the 60% who then has not a STEM degree get more STEM knowledge, more STEM skills, more STEM information, because this is essential and necessary for everybody, maybe especially in studies like economics, which is a very large group in the Netherlands. If they don't get more STEM skills in their programs, they will not have a job, because banks will still need people with an economic background, but also with STEM and ICT skills. So that is something we are really focusing on as well. And the same I can say about healthcare, where technology is getting more and more important. Our approach has been looked at by several countries. Although we didn't do very well, we are slowly improving. And I think within the next 5 years, we'll see that the numbers in Holland will go up because this goes so slow. And therefore, we exchange a lot of our information, and we now see there's a Danish technology pact. JetNet is now in Spain. In Hungarian, there's a STEM platform, and within the European STEM platform, we exchange all these ideas to learn from each other, to pick out the things that we like and we think are useful for other countries or regions. And we're also very happy that the European Commission is supporting this STEM platform and is now also going to invest in platforms for vocational excellence, which is also a bit based on the Dutch model. I'll leave it to this. There's much more to say. I can go on for hours, but you have special projects which you might find interesting. Then maybe just look for the Dutch STEM platform or look at my name at LinkedIn and send me an email, and I will be happy and willing to help you. Thank you.
Performance 6. Dance as a way of knowing. Milen Petrov and Marina Popova. Sofia, Bulgaria.
you.